My title this morning is Playing the Waiting Game. And like I said in my little blurby bit that goes on Facebook, you may or may not have seen it, waiting is a bit of a Marmite kind of subject or topic, in that some people, if you're kind of the laid-back type, you really don't mind sitting around waiting. But I suspect more people are in the opposite camp, and waiting is not high on your to-do agenda. You don't like it, you don't kind of feel you're getting anywhere, and you're not making any progress while you're waiting. And this idea for this preach came through a number of little strands, really. But my text is it's really the whole book of Luke, if I'm honest. Because as we've been working through Luke and looking at different topics and different subjects, and as I started to think about this subject of waiting, I was thinking, right, so where in Luke does it say waiting? You know, you're trying to make things fit in. And suddenly I just sort of thought, wow, hang on a minute. The whole of Jesus' life was a waiting period, actually. And I want us to just focus in for a minute on Luke 4, 24 to 30, which I think Hector's going to put up for us. Yeah, there you go. I'll read my version because I'm not quite sure how that version is. I've gone from the American Standard Version, which says, "But he said, 'Truly I say to you, no prophet is welcome in his hometown. But I say to you in truth, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the sky was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, when a severe famine came over all the land, and yet Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And there were many lepers in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet. None of them were cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian. And all the people in the synagogue were filled with rage as they heard these things, and they got up and they drove him out of the city. They brought him to the crest of the hill on which their city had been built, to purpose to throw him down from the cliff. But he passed through their midst and went on his way.'" And I think we've looked at this, somebody's read this before over the last few months. And as I was reading it, I realised then that the whole of Jesus' life was waiting. He was waiting for a specific moment to come. Why was he waiting? Well, because he absolutely knew his purpose. He knew why he was here. He knew that he had come to bring redemption to mankind, and he knew that he'd come to die and to make that acceptable way back to God for us. That was the point of it. He also knew that this moment wasn't it. And it's this kind of thing that happens on more than one occasion. As we read through the Gospels, we see Jesus moving away when it looked like the people were going to be killing him. In John 8:59, "Therefore they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and left the temple grounds." John 10, at the Feast of the Dedication, Jesus was asserting who he was, the Son of God, and the Jews hated it, and they picked up stones to stone him. And in verse 39, "Therefore they were seeking again to arrest him, and he eluded their grasp." Lots of times we read through the Gospels where they went to get him, to get rid of him, but he knew, not yet. It's not the right time. A scripture that shows us that he wasn't just running away from dying is in Luke 18:31, where it says, "He took the 12 aside and said to them, 'Behold, we're going up to Jerusalem, and all the things that have been written through the prophets about the Son of Man will be accomplished. He will be handed over to the Gentiles. He will be ridiculed and abused and spat upon. And after they have flogged him, they will kill him. And on the third day he will rise.' But the disciples understood none of these things. And the meaning of this statement was hidden from them, and they did not comprehend the things that were said. So in these other stories, he wasn't running away from the prospect of dying. It just wasn't the right time. And so we've got Jesus here waiting for 33 years for the right time. That's quite a long waiting period, I would say. I don't know how long you've had to wait for something. I don't know how, I can think back of times when I've been waiting for things, but I've never had to wait for 33 years to come to an accomplishment of my waiting period. To play that waiting game has never taken that long. And I don't know what the waiting period you might be going through or will go through will look like. It can be all sorts of things. It might be that you're waiting for a word that you feel from God to come to fruition, Dan. It might be that, and you're waiting. It might be a breakthrough in a relationship. Maybe a relationship's gone sour. Maybe a relationship's broken, and you're waiting to see that breakthrough. It might be for healing. It might be a financial breakthrough you're waiting for. It may be that you're waiting for a job to open up that you really feel you're meant to be doing, but somehow it just doesn't happen. And you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting. All I know is that when we are in that place of waiting, it's not comfortable. It's uncomfortable and it's hard work. And to be honest, I want it over quickly. I don't like playing the waiting game. It's not my favourite thing to do. But I read something a while ago that says when you understand that God is never late, you wait differently. When you trust his timing, you wait differently. And that helps to put things in a little bit better perspective, but I do forget that a lot when I'm waiting. So what does it mean for us to wait? Well, to wait actually means to hope, to anticipate, and to trust. 3 very positive words, I think you'd agree. And I also read someone that said, only those who trust God's perspective on their situation can wait with hope, anticipation, and trust. But it's about trusting God in it all and not getting stressed and fretting about where you're at and what's not happening, but be more focused on God and what he is doing in that situation. You see, without God's perspective, you wait impatiently. And that's not what it's about. You wait with mounting frustration. And you become disillusioned if you're having to wait a while. Bill Johnson said something, can you put that first quote up for me, Hector, that says, hope is the atmosphere that faith grows in. If you lose hope, your faith is going to be really struggling. You're going to become very sidetracked. You're going to become to a place where you just can't get hold of anything. Whereas if we have hope fixed in us, faith can start to grow because we're trusting in our God. And we know that hope is defined as that expectation of good, isn't it? We're looking to God to do good in our lives. We look for, we anticipate, we expect that God will work his purposes out in our lives. But when I am waiting for something, I get fed up. I get tired. I start to question the timings. I start to question him. I say, what's going on here? Does God love me? Does he care? When I'm looking for and anticipating and expecting that God's going to work his purposes out in my life, his timing will be right. Not right for me, but right for him and his plans. Can you imagine, and those of you that have had children, it will picture this in your mind's eye immediately. A child on Christmas morning, but they've been told not to go downstairs into the room. They're up at the crack of dawn, right? It's Christmas morning, and I want to get down there. And the excitement and the anticipation is completely overwhelming. How many of us have been in that situation? They have no idea what's in that room, but they know it's going to be good. And that's what it's like to wait for God to come through for us. But how many of us can put our hand up and say, yes, that's my waiting experience? Yes, I'm on tenterhooks just waiting for God to come through for me. No hands? Okay, we'll move on. And Jesus spent his whole life waiting for that specific moment. That's what he was waiting for. He knew his purpose, he knew why he was here, but his timing had to be right. And the text that we read together clearly demonstrates that he was following a plan and not deciding for himself, not making it up as he goes along, but he had to fit himself into how the plan was going to work out. You see, he said, I only do what the Father says for me to do. I only say what the Father wants me to say. People here were going to kill him, and he might well have looked at that situation and thought, here we go. This is it. This is what it's all about. This is the moment I've come for. But if he'd thought like that, he'd have missed it. He'd have missed the timing. The Father's plan would not have achieved its ultimate goal. You see, Satan had just before that tried to thwart the plan with Jesus in the desert. He tried to get him to submit to him, to give up his godship, if you like. But he wasn't having any of that, and so he tries this. He thinks, okay, well, he knows why he's here, so let's see if we can do something about that. But Jesus stuck to the plan. And here is Satan trying again. And the worst thing I think we can do, I've tried to do sometimes, is in that period of waiting is try and make the circumstances work. Try and fix things together and see something that isn't even there. And misread things. Because we're so desperate to be out of that place of waiting. Because we want to move on. We want to do the next thing. I just want to say to us all, don't let's try and work it out for God. He knows what he's doing. And if we trust his perspective, like we've read, like we heard about, when you understand that he's never late, you're not having to be in such a rush about it all. We trust his perspective on the situation. Jesus was never born for this planet. He was so far out of his comfort zone. He was away from heaven and all that meant to him. He was away from that close relationship that he had with his Father. He was out of that place. He was restricted completely to our time and our space. He was limited by our frailties. And here he was being presented with a get out of jail card. You can get it. You can follow the plan through. You know you've come to die. This is it. Here you go. Take it. But he just knew it wasn't the right time. And it says, and I love the way it says about all these different things. It says that he passed through their midst. You know, they'd taken him up there, and he passes through their midst. In the John 8 one, he just leaves the temple grounds. Well, they were all there. What was going on there? It just somehow just manages to elude them because it wasn't the right time. And I think, and this is a mistake I've made a lot in the past, that waiting is a very different thing to being still. In Scripture, it tells us to wait on the Lord, and yes, it tells us to be still and know that he's God. But I think when God takes us into a period of waiting, it's actually a time to be very focused on the right things. And somebody talks about actively waiting. When you look at the words that waiting means, to hope, to anticipate, to trust, they're not kind of passivey type words, are they? They're very proactive, really. And our waiting, I think, our waiting is supposed to be proactive. So how do we do that? You know, it's almost like, I know that when I've been in a waiting period, what I've done is think I've just got to sit back and do nothing. But I don't think, after doing a little bit of this studying, I don't think that's right. I think when Jesus and God asks us to be still and pulls us aside, and he just wants us to be in his presence, to listen to his heartbeat. The original root word actually for still doesn't mean be quiet, it means let go. That puts a different light on it, doesn't it? Let go and know that I am God. Let go of worrying about your finances. Let go of your unforgiveness. Let go of your past. Let go of what you can't control and rest in the knowledge that God is in control. That's what being still means. But waiting for God to come through, waiting for that period of time that you're in, is not about, it is about that, but it isn't about that. It's about actively learning to do something in the waiting period. And if we confuse the two, we're going to become really frustrated. Another quote I've got here that says, waiting is reducing my options, refining my focus, recognizing I'm about to enter a God moment, not sitting back and doing nothing, but positioning myself for what God is about to do. That's what we do when we wait. We get ourselves in a place for movement. We get ourselves in a place for what God is going to do in that moment in our lives. So how do we wait well? Well, one of the other meanings for the word wait that I read about meant to gather or collect. And when I read that, I thought that doesn't make sense. So I'm just going to put it aside, pretend I haven't read that. And I'll just go with the trust, hope, and anticipate. Don't know how many times you've done that. You think that doesn't make any sense. I'll pretend I haven't read that. And I left it alone. But then I looked at the life of Jesus, and I see that that's actually what he did in his waiting period. He gathered his disciples. It was time to invest in them. He recognized that this was their time. He had to put into them all that they would need to stay resolute for when he left them. He'd got 3 years to do it. So he gathered, he collected. He went about doing good. He healed the sick. He taught the people. He built relationships. He showed the nation how to live. He lived his life. He didn't just sit back and wait for this something to happen. He was proactive in his sphere of influence, and he grew that sphere more and more and more. And he spent the time with those men who he knew in a really short period of time were going to have to pick up this baton and run with it. He gathered them, he collected them together, and he invested into them. He was absolutely committed to his task. He was proactive in his sphere of influence, even while he was waiting. Even while he was waiting. And we read, don't we, in Scripture, that it says the news spread about him in the different regions he visited. They didn't have text, they didn't have mobile phone, they didn't have the newspaper, they didn't have the TV, they didn't have the radio. Word of mouth. People were touched, transformed by this man, and they go into places and they say, come and see somebody. Come and see someone who's told me everything about myself. Come and see what he's doing here. To the point that he even said, don't tell anybody. And what do we read? They go and they tell everybody. They were busy doing, and he just got on with it. It was all done by word of mouth. People were talking about him. And he set his stall out at the age of 12. Do you remember when his parents were looking for him after they'd been up to the temple? Even at the age of 12, he was setting himself up, and he said, well, didn't you know I must be about my Father's business? This is what I've come for. And again, he's waiting for that moment, even from that young age. He knew what it was all about. Now, recently we were up in Lincoln, not the recent trip, the trip before, and one of the guys was speaking at the church, and he was talking about a subject that really triggered me. He was talking about Joshua, and I started looking at it from a slightly different angle that he was looking at it. But I was really impressed, and this helps us to see what's going on here. Joshua was one of the 12 spies that you remember that went into Canaan, that Moses selected to go and look in Canaan. Now, they were there for 40 days, so it wasn't just a quick trip. They were there for well over a month. And they go in and they spread out, and they properly do it. They taste it. They explore it. They travel through it. They see everything that it's got to offer. And Joshua and Caleb got more and more excited by the whole thing. This is amazing. God said, this is our land. And just look at it. It's here for the taking. They went into the cities. They moved around the land. They just got completely absorbed and excited by it. And they come hurtling back with their messages, with their news, and the other guys are coming back, and they're bringing with them some of the produce. Have you ever seen grapes carried on a stake between two men? That's what they brought back. Stories of this place, how incredible it was. They literally described it as a land flowing with milk and honey. In other words, it's provident. It's got everything we need. This is our land, guys. And they were all talking like that. And then one of them says, but, the cities, they're massive. They're massive. The walls, you've never seen city walls like them. The people, oh my gosh, we were like grasshoppers. We were so tiny. We were so... No, we can't. Look at us. We can't do that. We can't go there. and I can imagine Joshua and Caleb's kind of going, what? Yeah, they are big, but God's bigger. Their cities are huge, but they can be our cities. We could go and live in those. God said it's our land. And the 10 convinced the people. The 10 sold their story. The 10 sold their fear. They sold the disillusionment. They sold their insecurity, their weak feelings. They sold their story. And Joshua and Caleb had to submit to the other's lack of faith. And God said, okay, for 40 years, that's it. This generation will not enter that land. I won't make you go to the place that you're scared of. You can just wander. You can just go. I don't know where they thought they were going to go. In reality, they've just walked through a desert. Where did they think they were going to go? Surely not back to Egypt. Surely that wasn't on the table. And the next 40 years was spent wandering until a whole generation had died out. Now, Alan Hoare, a very good friend of ours up in Lincoln, known to some of you guys, writes in his book, The Wardrobe, brilliant. And again, when it's written down like I'm going to read it to you, it brings, like, wow, I hadn't really thought of it like that. But Alan says, one day I was giving a lecture on this subject, Joshua and Caleb, and I saw in my imagination hundreds of thousands of people coming out of the desert. And as I looked, none of them were over the age of 60 years, except for two old men, well into their 80s. And I asked one of them, where are all the grandfathers and the grandmothers? Where are the aged ones? And I received the reply, we've buried them, all back there in the dirt graves in the desert. We've been wandering for the last 40 years. We buried them at an average rate of 40 a day, or 290 a week, or 1,250 a month. We've lost over 600,000 people. Now, Alan did his research. Don't ask me to explain it all. I don't know. But when you get that kind of image, can you imagine what it must have been like? We read over these things sometimes, don't we? For 40 years, Joshua submitted and Caleb submitted to that lack of faith and wandered. I don't know about you. He supported Moses fully, not complaining, not griping, not moaning about how unfair it all was. You know, I wonder if he ever thought, do you know what? I've seen it and I'm going. Yeah. Yeah. I can find a little corner, build myself a little house. Yeah. Me and my family, we're going to look after ourselves. Yeah. Joshua actually said, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. But I wonder if the thought ever went through his head. Guys, I'm not doing, Moses, no. Not me, I'm going in. He could have even tagged along with everybody as they trotted off. He wouldn't have been missed, really, with that massive crowd of people. But he didn't. He submits himself to this waiting period. Completely submitted to it. He didn't moan, he didn't groan, he didn't complain. And he was involved in battles that they had to fight along the way. He had to watch as his generation died around him. He had to bury them. He had to walk away with them, the others. It was a period for him of mentorship from Moses, so much so that he was the successor for these people when they went into Canaan. And finally, he gets there. What a wait, longer than Jesus. 40 years of waiting, without moaning, without groaning, without complaining, doing the stuff. And that's, I think, one of the secrets for waiting, is that we have to keep doing the stuff. I also think there's a really important point to make here. When we are waiting for our breakthrough, or it doesn't happen like we think or we want it to or we expect it to, what is our response? You see, at this point, some people actually walk away from God because they think he hasn't come through for them. They think he doesn't really love them. They question whether there's really a God. And it's all in this waiting time. We were told last weekend a horrific story. One of the area pastors at Lincoln had a guy from North Nigeria come to their house for a meal. And he told the story. Boko Haram had gone into his town. You know, there's the group that take the girls and slaughter everybody. He saw his father beheaded in front of him. He saw them attempt to decapitate his brother. He himself, they tried to decapitate him. Joy said he has got the most massive scar across here. The doctors actually don't know how he survived the operation to get him well. And he'd come over to this country and he was sharing a meal with Joy and Paul. And they said to him, "Why are you going back?" And he said, "Well, God hasn't asked me to leave. This is my country. These are my people. I have to be where they are." And Joy and Paul started to tell him how and I'm sorry to have to say, in the Western church, people give up on God because life gets a bit hard. Gets a bit tough. And he looked at them and he was completely mystified. And he said, "What story is the church telling people? What story has the church sold? We were never promised an easy ride. Why do you expect it to be easy?" And I just was listening to Joy sharing this, and I was like, "Oh my Lord, forgive me, God." You see, in John 16:33, Jesus himself said, "In this life you will have trouble." But we don't read that one very often, do we? Isaiah 53, Jesus himself is described as being a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. In Luke 9:58, Jesus says, "The Son of Man's got nowhere to lay his head." He didn't have a house. He didn't have stuff. He just was himself. Here I am. Even when he was asked to start paying taxes, he had to send Peter fishing. So there's the first fish you catch, just pull it out, it'll have a coin in its mouth. He wasn't walking around Israel with a suitcase with his stuff in. He had nothing. He was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And we have this entitlement thinking in our churches that God hasn't come through for me. Nobody's tried to take my head off from my neck. Nobody's pointed the finger at me and made me choose between them and God. Whether that'll come or not, who's to say? But right now they haven't. But somewhere around this world, our brothers and our sisters are actually going through that. They are having to live those decisions. It makes us look really pathetic, I think. I'm sorry. I just felt like, God, please, help me. Help me. When we are waiting for God to change our situation or waiting for those circumstances to change, let's just try to remember to trust God through it and not give up because it's a bit tough, because it's a bit hard. I've spent a lot of time over the last few months just thinking, even the songs we sing, sometimes think, how do they sing this in Iran? How do they sing this in the middle of Ukraine? How do they sing this? Because we just have this sense of we're entitled to what we have, and we're actually not entitled to anything in real terms. Not of that sort of thing. I suppose one of the most quoted scriptures that when we're waiting is that people throw at us, Isaiah 40:31, "Those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They'll mount up with wings like eagles. They'll run and not get tired. They walk and not be weary." Well, I don't know about you, but in truth, it really doesn't feel like that when I'm waiting. I don't feel strong, and I don't feel like I can run, and I don't feel like I'm not tired. But if I don't, why not? It must be me. God's word doesn't lie, so it must be something about me that's not right. Could it be that we spend so much time getting anxious and stressed that we wear ourselves out? That we don't let his strength fill us because we're so busy stressing about the situation. I believe my prayer needs to be in these times, Lord, change me. I've got no entitlement for this easy ride. I spend too much time praying for the situation to change and not me to change. And I think I have to do more of that. In the dark place, I will seek Jesus because he's the light. In the place of conflict, I must seek Jesus because he gives peace. In the hard place, I have to determine to seek Jesus because he alone can give me the joy. And in the desert, I need to seek Jesus because he alone will give rivers of living water that will sustain me. None of that sense of strength comes when all I pray about is changing the situation. I've found I've got to tenaciously hold on and do the right thing just because it's the right thing and not because it feels like it. I'm sorry, it's not too easy listening at the minute. But I've held on sometimes with my fingertips because I've known it's the right thing to do. I haven't felt like it. I haven't felt like coming here. I haven't felt like coming and seeing you. I haven't felt like praying. I haven't felt like reading my Bible. I haven't felt like it. But I refuse to listen to my feelings because I trust my God. And sometimes I'm hanging on with literally my fingertips. And you might never know anything about it. And you know what? I don't care if you don't, because he does. He knows. And I can stand here this morning and say to you, he has never not come through for me. It might not have been when I wanted it to. It might not have been when I felt like I needed him to. And it might not have been in the way I wanted it to. But he's always come through for me. And he will always come through for me. You see, playing this waiting game, we have to remember that God is a constant. He is unchanging. Malachi 3:6 says, "For I, the Lord, do not change." Hebrews 13:8, Jesus Christ the same, yesterday, today, and forever. What makes me so special that he won't be that? What makes you so special that he won't be the same yesterday, today, and forever? If he did it yesterday, he can jolly well do it today, and I know he will do it tomorrow. I know it. I don't feel it, I know it. Whether I feel him or not, whether I see him or not, like the sun on a cloudy day, is there and is still God. He doesn't change. And in the waiting, the emotion that rises more often than not is fear. Fear because it's not what we expected or wanted. Fear because the situation hasn't changed. Fear because we feel like we've let God down. Fear because we think we've let other people down. And we listen to that small, insidious voice that says, did God really say? And we hear it and we start to question. Fear paralyzes us. It makes us fearful of trusting ourselves. It makes us impatient. It makes us angry. It impacts our physical and mental health. It impacts our fear, our thinking, and our decision making. And we give in to this fear instead of saying, I will trust you, Jesus. I will wait for you. I will not try and make it happen myself. I will wait for you. There's two acronyms that I found for fear, and we usually go with one of them. First one is forget everything and run. Or else face everything and rise. Which are we going to choose today? Are we going to just forget everything and just turn our backs and run? Or are we going to face everything and rise? You see, folks, we can wait well. We can play the waiting game and win. We can wait with purpose. Whatever he says to you, do it. Don't just sit back on your backside and wait for something to happen. Do what he's asked you to do. We can wait with passion. We can love the Lord our God with all our hearts, with all our minds, with all our strength. We can wait with persuasion. Build yourself up in your most holy faith. Speak to yourself with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Silence the voice. You can wait with persistence. You can take up the whole armour of God so that you'll be able to resist on the evil day, and having done everything, to stand firm. We need to learn to stand firm. And we can learn to wait with peace. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and pleading with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which passes all comprehension, will guard your heart and mind in Christ Jesus. So what are the rules for the waiting game? Matthew 6:33. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things, and that's when you read the chapter before, it's all the stuff will be added to you. He knows what we need. He knows what we need. It's talking about what you've got. The rule is knowing that God is never late and trusting his perspective. Jesus demonstrated such patience through his 33 years. And I don't know about you, there are certain words that kind of... Patience to me is kind of a mild, meek sort of thing in my head, I thought. So when I heard the word patience, I've really changed my mind while I've been studying for this. Patience isn't weakness. It's not mildness, and it's definitely not passive. Patience is strong and determined. And I found this quote about what is patience, just to finish with. It says, what is patience? It's the intolerance of the enemy's work to kill, steal, and destroy. And it provokes in us a kind of courageousness that says enough. And that's patience. I think I need to say enough some more times in my own life. I need to say, God, I trust you in more times. I just want you to be blessed. I just want you to know that you can wait well and that you can win this waiting game.